June 1812. The air was still, the kind of stillness that comes before something irreversible. At the edge of the Niemen River, an army unlike anything Europe had ever seen stood waiting. Not thousands, not even hundreds of thousands, but more than 600,000 soldiers. An entire moving civilization of men, horses, artillery, ambition, and fear. At the center of it all stood one man, Napoleon Bonaparte, a figure already whispered about as more myth than man. He had reshaped Europe, crushed empires, rewritten the rules of war. And now, he was about to make a decision that would either crown him eternal or destroy everything he had built. As the first troops crossed into Russian territory, no one could have known that they were walking into one of the greatest disasters in human history. But here's the question that still haunts historians today. Was this invasion a calculated masterstroke or the beginning of an inevitable collapse? To understand the invasion of Russia, you have to understand the mind of Napoleon, because this wasn't just a war, it was personal. By 1812, Napoleon had done the impossible. He rose from a relatively unknown officer to Emperor of France. He defeated coalitions of Europe again and again. Austria, Prussia, Italy, all had fallen or bent to his will. But one force remained beyond his control: Britain, an island empire, untouchable by land. So Napoleon devised a different strategy, not war by bullets, but war by economics. The continental system, a massive blockade designed to cut Britain off from European trade. And for a while, it worked. But then something changed. Russia began to resist. Under Alexander I of Russia, the empire quietly stepped away from Napoleon's system. Trade resumed. The alliance weakened. And in Napoleon's world, defiance could not be tolerated. Some historians argue this wasn't just about economics, because invading Russia was not logical. It was dangerous, expensive, unpredictable. So why do it? There are whispers among historians that Napoleon feared losing control of Europe, that he needed a decisive victory to maintain dominance, or perhaps something deeper: an obsession, a belief that his destiny demanded total control, that no power, no matter how distant, could be allowed to stand outside his influence. And that belief may have been his greatest weakness. On paper, the Grande Armée was unstoppable. It was the largest army ever assembled in Europe up to that point. But beneath its size, there was a hidden truth. It wasn't just French. It was a patchwork of nations: Poles, Germans, Italians, Dutch, Spaniards. Many of them didn't fight out of loyalty. They fought because they had no choice. And this creates one of the most overlooked mysteries of the campaign. Was the Grande Armée already weak before it even entered Russia? Some experts believe the army's diversity was actually a liability. Different languages, different motivations, different levels of commitment. In battle, unity is everything. And in Russia, that unity would be tested to its breaking point. As the army pushed deeper into Russia, they encountered something unexpected. Not resistance, not major battles, but emptiness. Endless land, endless roads, endless silence. The deeper they went, the longer their supply lines stretched. Food became scarce, horses weakened, men grew tired. And yet, Napoleon kept moving forward. Some historians believe Russia never intended to fight early, that from the very beginning, this was a trap, a strategy designed to exploit something Napoleon could never defeat: geography. By retreating deeper into Russia, they forced him into a war not against soldiers, but against distance itself. Village after village burned, fields destroyed, supplies vanished. The Russians were erasing their own land, and with it,
Napoleon's chances of survival. This was not just strategy, it was sacrifice. Think about this. What kind of leadership chooses to burn its own cities, to starve its own people just to defeat an enemy? Some historians suggest this was desperation. Others believed it was brilliance. But there's a darker idea, that Russia understood something Napoleon didn't, that war isn't always about winning battles. Sometimes it's about making your enemy lose slowly.
Finally, after months of retreat, Russia turned to fight. The Battle of Borodino, one of the bloodiest battles of the Napoleonic Wars. Tens of thousands dead in a single day. Napoleon technically won, but something was wrong. The Russian army didn't collapse, they retreated again. And Napoleon made a decision that still confuses historians. He didn't fully commit his elite imperial guard. Theory: the moment he hesitated. Why hold back your strongest force at the most critical moment? Some say he feared a counterattack. He wanted to preserve his last reserve. Or he was no longer the same commander. Was this caution, or the first sign that Napoleon was losing his edge? Moscow, the prize, the symbol, the victory. Napoleon entered the city expecting surrender. Instead, he found silence, and then fire. Flames spread across the city, consuming everything. To this day, no one knows for certain. Was it ordered by Russian officials? Was it the act of desperate citizens? Or was it chaos unleashed by war? Some theories even suggest that prisoners were released to start fires, that it was a coordinated act of total war, or that it spiraled beyond anyone's control. But the result was the same. Napoleon had taken Moscow and gained nothing. Days passed, then weeks. Napoleon waited for peace, for surrender, for something, but nothing came. And with every passing day, winter grew closer. Historians agree on one thing: waiting in Moscow was fatal. But why did he stay? Did he believe Russia would negotiate? Did he underestimate the time? Or was he trapped by pride, unable to admit failure? Sometimes the most dangerous decision is doing nothing. When Napoleon finally ordered retreat, it was already too late. Winter had arrived, and it was merciless. Temperatures plunged, men froze where they stood. Hunger drove soldiers to desperation. The army disintegrated. We often hear that General Winter defeated Napoleon, but some historians challenge this. They argue the army was already collapsing before Winter. Logistics had failed, morale was broken. Winter didn't destroy the army, it simply finished what had already begun. From over 600,000 men, only a fraction survived. The invasion of Russia didn't just end a campaign, it ended an illusion. The illusion that Napoleon could not be defeated. And from that moment forward, his empire began to crumble. At first, it didn't look like a disaster. There were no dramatic defeats, no catastrophic ambushes, just small things. Men falling behind, horses collapsing on the road, supply wagons that never arrived, and commanders who stopped asking questions. Because deep inside the ranks of the Grande Armée, something had already begun to break. Not the army, but the belief that this war could be won. Long before the fires of Moscow, long before the snow, some historians believe the invasion had already failed, not on the battlefield, but in logistics. Food supplies were miscalculated, distances were underestimated, coordination between units began to fail. And here's the terrifying part. Napoleon may have known, but he kept moving forward anyway. As the army advanced deeper into Russia, something strange began to happen. Soldiers vanished, not in battle, not in large numbers, but slowly, quietly, one by one. Entire groups would fall behind and never return. At first, it was blamed on exhaustion, then desertion, but the numbers didn't make sense. Some accounts suggest that tens of thousands of soldiers simply disappeared. No bodies, no records,
no trace. So what happened? Did they desert and blend into the countryside? Were they captured silently by Russian forces? Or was it chaos unleashed by war? Some theories even suggest that prisoners were released to start fires, that it was a coordinated act of total war, or that it spiraled beyond anyone's control. But the result was the same. Napoleon had taken Moscow and gained nothing. The Grande Armée looked united, but inside it was fractured. Remember, this was not a French army, it was an empire army, and not everyone believed in Napoleon's vision. There are whispers in historical analysis that some commanders intentionally slowed movements, that coordination failures weren't accidental, that not every general wanted Napoleon to win. Because if Napoleon fell, some would gain power, others would regain freedom. Was there an active betrayal or just passive resistance? We may never know. But one thing is certain, when unity disappears, even the strongest army becomes fragile. When Napoleon stood in Moscow, watching it burn, he still believed he had time. Time to negotiate, time to recover, time to win. But Moscow wasn't victory. It was a trap closing, and outside the city, winter was already approaching. Napoleon didn't lose because he made one mistake. He lost because he believed he was still winning.
When the retreat finally began, it wasn't organized. It wasn't controlled. It was chaos. The roads filled with men trying to survive. Not as soldiers, but as humans. Hungry, frozen, desperate. History records something few want to talk about. Some soldiers did things unthinkable to stay alive, fighting each other for scraps, abandoning wounded comrades, and in extreme cases, turning to cannibalism. This was no longer a war. This was survival horror. But the body wasn't the only thing breaking. The mind followed. Soldiers began hallucinating, hearing voices, seeing things in the snow. And even Napoleon himself was no longer the same. Some historians suggest that during the retreat, Napoleon changed. He became distant, less decisive, less aggressive. The man who once dominated battlefields was now reacting instead of controlling. Was it exhaustion, pressure, or the realization that he had made a mistake he couldn't fix? History often simplifies the story. Napoleon was defeated by winter, but that explanation feels incomplete because winter didn't attack, it didn't plan, it didn't trap. What if winter wasn't the cause, but the finishing blow? Because by the time the snow arrived, the army was starving, leadership was fractured, morale was gone. Winter didn't defeat Napoleon. It revealed how broken everything already was. Then came one of the most tragic moments of the retreat, the crossing of the Berezina River. Surrounded, outnumbered, desperate, the army tried to escape. Bridges collapsed. Men drowned. Thousands died in chaos. Some believe this was the final moment Napoleon could have regained control. But even here, survival came at a cost. He escaped, but his army was finished. When the invasion ended, there was no victory, no triumph, no glory. Only silence. For more than 600,000 soldiers, only a shattered fraction remained. And when Napoleon Bonaparte returned to Paris, he didn't return as the conqueror of Europe. He returned as a man followed by questions. Questions that no one dared to ask out loud, but everyone was thinking. What just happened? The impact was immediate. Across Europe, something shifted. Nations that once feared Napoleon began to resist him. Coalitions formed. Alliances strengthened. And for the first time in years, Napoleon was no longer seen as invincible. Power isn't just about armies, it's about perception. And the moment Europe saw Napoleon bleed, they realized something dangerous. He could be defeated. And once that idea spread, his empire was already falling.
Now we reach the most unsettling theory of all. Not that Napoleon made mistakes, not that Russia was stronger, but something far more disturbing. What if the invasion of Russia was unwinnable from the very beginning? Some historians believe this wasn't a failed campaign, it was a mathematical impossibility. Think about it. The distances were too vast, the supply lines too fragile, the climate too extreme, the enemy too patient. No matter how brilliant Napoleon was, the variables were stacked against him. Napoleon wasn't just fighting Russia, he was fighting geography, climate, time, and his own ambition. And those are enemies no general can defeat. But there's another layer to this story, one that goes beyond strategy, beyond war, beyond history, pride. Because Napoleon didn't just want to win, he needed to win. What if Napoleon wasn't defeated by Russia, but Russia revealed the truth, that no matter how powerful you become, there are forces in this world you were never meant to defeat.